Okay. I read Disrupting Class, How Disruptive Innovation Will Change the Way the World Learns, and it's written by Christensen. After reading the book, I kind of thought the target audience would embody anyone who was in education or wanting to learn how to reform our education policies and the way that we're teaching. The book specifically mentions teachers, those who design learning for the post-secondary world and corporate training world, and also the government. And then also anyone that's interested in creative destruction would also probably enjoy this book. The book gives this introduction about the U.S. education system and how it spends more money on our students, yet we're still at or below education levels of other countries. So it's kind of a problem and an issue that we need to address. He lists these reasons why schools may struggle. There aren't enough computers in the classroom, schools are underfunded, sometimes school systems blame the parents or the students for not reaching the test scores that they need. Maybe the U.S. teaching model is broken, and also teacher unions. And he kind of sets up this question, maybe it's not individually those things, but collectively it's all of those things that are creating struggles. The book was really interesting to read because after the introduction, there was a section about this high school, and it's this fictional story he made up to kind of give you an example. So each chapter that I first read like 3 pages about these characters who were struggling in some sense. There was Rob, who's a student, he doesn't get science, and then there was Maria, she's also a student, and she gets it easily, she excels, she does really well in school, she wishes there was more challenges. Then there's Mr. Carlos Alvera. He's a teacher, he has 120 students, so he feels constantly overwhelmed. And then I think one of you guys mentioned the No Child Left Behind Act, and the book kind of mentions that and how it adds all these jobs that teachers in the school system weren't prepared to handle or weren't set up to do. And then there is the counselor, Miss Alliston, who wishes everyone was like Maria. She's just really fond of her and was kind of disappointed by the other students like Rob and Doug down here who gets in trouble. Halfway through the book, she takes on a new position as principal, so she sees a variety of different problems. There's a student, Sam Spitz, who's a freshman. He has trouble reading, so she sees him frequently. Doug, he's the second-string soccer player, but he misbehaves, and so he does graffiti on the walls at school, and so now he can't participate in the tests, and he may be kicked out of school. And then lastly, there's this person mentioned very briefly, Patty Birkins, who's a parent, and she thinks she knows more than anyone else at the school, and she should be running the whole place, and stirs up all this dust. So it's kind of interesting. I'm kind of like a visual learner anyway, but it's nice to see a picture, like an example, and then read the scientific stuff. So chapter 1 is why schools struggle to teach differently when each student learns differently. Basically, he talks about how we need to extrinsically and intrinsically motivate students, and that's how you have to do it. They have to be motivated to learn, which I kind of felt like, why can people learn because it's fun or because they want, why do they have to be motivated by some kind of reward or something? So he kind of talks about, too, how we have these standardized tests and we have this monolithic style of teaching. Chapter 2 talks about making the shift, meeting the society's needs. Talks about disruptive innovation, so kind of like creative destruction. There's a whole chapter on it. His definition is, it's not a breakthrough improvement. Instead of sustaining the traditional improvement trajectory in an established plane of competition, it disrupts the trajectory by bringing the market a productive service that actually is not as good as what companies historically have been selling. So I guess that kind of sets the background for the rest of the book. Chapter 3, Cram Classroom Computers. He talks about how in the 1990s we started putting computers in classrooms, and then started out with just a few, like maybe 1, and then 5 years later you have 13 in the classroom, and then you have like 500 for a school and that kind of thing. And so he kind of makes an argument that if computers and technology were the cure, we would see evidence of that already. And we're still behind on standardized tests. So that's what's going on with that. Chapter 2, making the shift, schools need to, Chapter 4, disruptively employing computers. It talks about how there's 2 stages of disruption. The first stage talks about how, like, in 2000, there were 45,000 enrollments in online classes. Today there's over 1 million, so that's really popular. That was kind of the first stage, is getting people to go online and do web-based technology. Second stage is making it so your instruction is centered around each individual student. So creating, like, software programs that will adapt to each individual needs and pace and time frame, and kind of just so you can learn each subject matter individually. He talks about the future of classroom and how he brings it up like it's going to be this really big scary thing, but it's not that way at all. He just talks about virtual chem classrooms where maybe you're doing experiments and you're doing tests, but it's all virtual. And I could believe that. I think there's probably several cases of that across the world already. Chapter 5, the system for student-centric learning. As we mentioned before, it's a two-stage process. And he talks about how technologies that he wants to employ or thinks that will work need to be tested outside of the K through 12, and it's important to test it outside to see how it works as well for that. This is my favorite chapter. It was called The Impact of the Earliest Years on Student Success. There's overwhelming evidence that beginning education at 5 years of age or pre-kindergarten is actually too late. A lot of our intellectual capacities are developed by 18 months to 36 months. So we need to be educating way earlier than we are, because we're spending like 98% of our costs after our intellectual capacities have been determined. So that's kind of a big portion of our money in tax dollars. I thought it was kind of interesting because, like, a lot of times you can take useful things and apply them to, like, our individual lives. Like, so maybe we'll all be parents someday, you know, and so I put, like, the most powerful is the choice of the words that we use. So they did these 2 tests, and there was a talkative college-educated parents who spoke 48 million words in that 36-month time frame, and there was a welfare parent who only spoke 13 million, and then they found out that the words that were spoken in that first year of life really affected their intellectual capacities as well. And those who weren't exposed to that many words had deficiencies in their intellectual capacity and language skills. So, Chapter 7, improving education research. From here on out, there is a ton of models and tests, and it gets really, really boring. But it's kind of useful information. He has a lot of scientific-based research, so that was kind of nice, more believable that it might be doable. Forging consensus. It talks about how public schools are mostly based in this section of this graph, and we need to reach more like the upper half where we're doing role modeling and visions, and reach out into other areas instead of just using power tools for instruction. 9, giving the schools the right structures to innovate. It talks about how we need heavyweight teams. So this side right here, I don't know if you can tell, but it talks about the level of change that is needed, and obviously it's a really high level of change if we are going to be doing all this individualized software programs and student-centric programs. So they need like heavyweight teams. And then his conclusion, I thought was kind of, it was nice to read. It's like the road to realizing our highest hope is not an easy one, but, you know, if we keep going on the way we're going, it's not going to do any good. If we do some changes, then we can realize our most daring dreams. So it was kind of promising to read. And then my critical review, I thought it was a very scientific approach to identifying the problems of our education system. It did have really idealistic solutions, though. I don't know if it would. He wants to like implement them right away, but it's going to create a long series of change if this is what we're going to do. and he doesn't really take into account any budgets or logistics of implementing programs, so I think that might be another big issue that needs to be addressed before a consensus is made. It also involves major managerial and organizational challenges that he may not realize with school structures and things like that. Not all of them are going to be able to use the kind of technology that he thinks they should. He also really pushes motivation theory. So, like, why can't people learn for fun? He doesn't address that. And then overall, I thought it was really interesting and informative. Had great details and examples, so it was fun to read. Thanks.